We are grateful to all of you for making your time for this important online training program. Yesterday, we have wonderful session taken by our eminent experts. We would once again like to welcome all our eminent speakers. It's a great pleasure for all of us to have you all here with us. A very warm welcome to you all, and we thank you all for being with us. We would also like to thank all the participants for their active participation in the session on day one and look forward for the similar cooperation and support for today's session as well. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite our eminent speakers, I humbly request all of you to kindly keep your microphone on mute during the session to avoid disturbance, and all speakers kindly complete their presentation within their allotted time. Thank you. Now, without further delay, may I invite Ms. Sugandhita Vadera, BRPL, to kindly start with her presentation. Sugandhita Vadera is an electrical engineer and MTech in Urban Development Management. She has 6 year experience in solar, photovoltaic design and development. Presently, she is working as assistant manager BSES Sunny Power Limited. She has working experience in design and engineering of solar PV plants, analyzing policies and creating database for capacity building for solar sectors. May I start? Over to you, Vadera ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, good afternoon to one and all. Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. I am Sugandhita.
Excuse me, madam. Yes. There is one pop-up at the bottom of your screen. So could you minimize it? Yes. This one.
Is it fine, sir?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, good afternoon to one and all. I am Sugandhita and I am working with the Renewable Department of BSES Rajdhani Power Limited. So BSES is a joint venture between Government of Delhi and Reliance Infrastructure, and it supplies power to about 2.7 million customers, which is spread across south and west of Delhi. So the agenda of my presentation: first I will briefly set the context and the background. Then I will share the types of Then I will share the types of energy storage technologies and the applications and the possible use cases in the electricity grid. Then value stacking of the various applications and one of the sizing methodologies for a specific use case and its benefit. And in the end, I will briefly share about the pilot implementation of battery energy storage in the BRPL license area. Ma'am, is the slide moving? Because I'm not able to move to the next slide.
No. Right now we are in agenda slide, madam.
Yeah, I'm not able to move it forward. Please.
Once click there. Click this slide. Or either. Yes. Now it's
Yeah,
moving.
now it's moving. Okay. So the background, the context, as we all know, that the conventional grid is seeing a transition with the new entrants. We have seen that government of India is supporting the development of renewable energy, and they have set aggressive energy targets about 175 gigawatt by 2022 and 450 by gigawatt by 2030. As of now, October 2021, 103 gigawatt has already been installed. Then there is also a capacity addition of about 40 gigawatt grid connected solar rooftop. Apart from this, there are RPO obligations set in terms of Delhi discoms. The regulator have set renewable purchase obligations. Then we have a solar policy in only BRPL licensed area, that is south and west of Delhi. The cumulative capacity of rooftop solar is already 88.47 megawatt. Then apart from solar, there is also thrust to deploy more and more EV chargers, and FAME 2 is part of the electric mobility mission. Then apart from these, there is a deviation settlement mechanism that ensures the grid discipline. And also recently, last year, the electricity rights of consumers have been rolled out, which mandates the discoms to provide automated tools, use automated tools, and provide 24/7 power to all. So this is on the policy front. And as we know that the new entrants are entering in the conventional unidirectional grid. So what are the challenges and what are the possible solutions that are being planned or that is required? So let's discuss about the challenges first. So even when the renewables have not entered or integrated in the conventional grid, we see that for BRPL, if you see this blue line is the summer load, and this blue line is the summer load and the orange line is the winter load, and you can clearly see that there is a seasonal variation in the demand, and there is also a daily basis diurnal variation in the demand, and that is huge. So on the daily basis also and on the seasonal basis also. So this is the kind of variation that we see in Delhi. Then apart from this, there is the same pattern or the same trend is also being followed by our assets. There are overloading that happens in the grid assets, line overloading or overloading, and that can be understood by this. This is a typical summer day, June summer day, and a 630 kVA distribution transformer. And you can see that if we set a threshold of say 70%, this 70% might vary from utility to utility. For us, 70% is the threshold, and beyond which the planning starts to augment or upgrade a particular line or an asset. So you can see that in this transformer, beyond 70%, only there are few instances, say from late night, from 20 hours to say 2 in the morning, you see that it crosses the threshold line, and rest the entire day it is under the threshold line, which is below 70% of the rated capacity of 630. So apart from these variations in the demand, there is renewables that we all know that is being integrated massively and with a very fast rate. And there is also EVs which add to the intermittent nature of these renewable resources. Then we also have the obligation to provide reliable and quality power supply to our consumers. So what are the possible solutions? So few of the solutions that are mentioned here have been discussed by the speakers in the yesterday's session. And today I am going to discuss about energy storage. So we know that this variation, to meet this variation, the integration of the distribution energy sources to the conventional grid is challenges because of the increased complexity of maintaining the system reliability. So the key is to overcome this by using various smart grid technologies, and one of them is energy storage, because energy storage has the capability of offering one possible source of flexibility in the grid. So what are the various energy storage technologies? So energy storage can be broadly classified into mechanical, electrochemical, electrical and chemical and thermal. Under mechanical, we see there is pumped hydro. Pumped hydro is the oldest technology, but it has its own, it's a mature technology, but it has its own limitations because it needs a lot of water resource and land resource. Then there is compressed air, which also requires land. Then flywheels. Under electrochemical, we have primary batteries and secondary batteries, specifically secondary batteries. In electrical, we have capacitors, so supercapacitors, which is like the conventional capacitors, and hydrogen and molten salt. So, out of all these technologies, when we compare with each another, the major parameters are the maturity, the efficiency, and the response time, or the charge and the discharge cycles and the time. So we can see here in the comparison table that lithium ion or the electrochemical technology is the one that stands out from rest of the technologies because each of them has its own sets of pros and cons. But electrochemical and specifically lithium ion is the one that stands out because it gives us good efficiency. The response time varies from few milliseconds to seconds, and the charge time and the discharge time can be designed from few minutes to even days. So bottling down and focusing on battery energy storage system. So we know that battery is a simple device that converts chemical energy into electrical energy, and we know that it has two electrodes, cathode and anode, and based on the type of material that is used for the electrolyte and the electrodes, the chemistry is defined, and then it varies. The performance varies from the kind of material that is being used. So under batteries, batteries can also be broadly classified into primary batteries and the secondary batteries. We are here talking about secondary batteries because these are those kind of batteries which can be discharged and recharged many times. So in the energy storage, we can see battery energy storage. There are conventional batteries, advanced lead acid, nickel cadmium, and then there are lithium ion also, which is being heavily deployed now because of the EV transition and the usage in the electric vehicles. In in advanced lead acid, the cycle life is around 1200. It is a mature technology, but at the same time, it has less life cycles. In sodium-based batteries, there is a high energy density, high efficiency of charge discharge, long cycle life, but it has its stringent O&M requirements and it is combustible with water. Then in lithium battery technologies, it also has a high energy density. Few of the chemistries in lithium ion, such as lithium iron phosphate, has a good thermal stability, so it is considered as safe, and it has long life cycles. One of the technology chemistry, that is lithium titanate, is capable of providing up to 10,000 cycle life. Coming to the role of storage in the power system. So the storage can be located anywhere in at generation, transmission, distribution, or even behind the meter at the consumer level. And the various applications would depend on which part of the grid the storage is being designed or being located at. So what are the possible applications that an energy storage provides? So this energy time shift and arbitrage. Energy time shift and energy arbitrage is simply means that we are charging the batteries at those time when the prices of the power or the system marginal cost is low, so that we are able to use it when there is a when the cost of the price is high or when the power prices are high. That is energy time shift. Then another use case is electric supply capacity. That means that we have some specific capacity available in our grid, and we can utilize it, and we defer or avoid putting another plant or any other generation plant in the portfolio. Then regulation application, that is a frequency regulation. So if there is a fast variation in the demand, and to maintain that grid frequency, storage can help. Then spinning and non-spinning and supplemental reserves. That means that the reserve capacity, when is required, if suppose a resource unexpectedly becomes unavailable or there is a outage, then there is a capacity, certain capacity that is available, and it acts like a spinning reserve. Then comes voltage support. The power conversion system or the inverter in the storage system, if it is operated at a non-unity power factor, then it can help us in supplying or in absorbing the reactive power to the network and give the VAR support. Then comes black start. Black start means that the system, because it has an inverter, it has an ability to act as a standalone mode and act as a UPS system, and it depends on where it is sited, and it can help during a black start, if there is a outage, it can help act as one. Then comes load following and ramping up of renewables. Load following, if there is any variation in the system frequency, timeline loading, then storage can help. Storage can also help ramping up the renewables, intermediate and variable renewable. Then comes transmission upgrade deferral and distribution upgrade deferral. In distribution upgrade or transmission deferral, the dotted line that you see here is the threshold, and you can see that this threshold is crossed only for say few minutes or few days, and this threshold can be met by discharging the batteries this, and then it can limit the capacity to the threshold level, and we can avoid or defer the upgrade of a certain line or a certain asset. Or we can deploy similar storage at the downstream network to relieve the upstream network. So that comes under a distribution or transmission deferral. Then another use case can be power quality. If there is any variation in the voltage magnitude in the primary frequency or power factor improvement, the system is capable of helping meet that. And then lastly, demand charge management. Demand charge management can be used by the consumers, where consumers can deploy a storage at their end, and commercial or industrial users, which are also time of the day consumers, they can deploy storage, and they can reduce their demand during the peak hours, thereby reducing their electricity bills. So energy storage is capable of all these applications, and what is important is to design or see that where the system can be located, and we can draw these benefits from this technology. So as you can see in this graph, batteries can be sized and can be designed from few minutes to few days, and because of this modular system, because of this system that designed from few kilowatts to say few gigawatts, we are able to meet all the use cases or the benefits that it can add to the grid. Of pilots have been done using batteries for various applications that we just discussed, from power quality, energy arbitrage, energy time shifting, to even end user services and spinning reserves. And for all these applications, we have seen that lithium ion amongst all the other technologies have proven it successfully and can be easily deployed for these applications. So while designing a battery energy storage, what are the key characteristics, or while you are studying and comparing the different technologies, what are the key characteristics and technical requirements that are required? So battery storage and capacity, energy storage, it can be defined as the total capacity that it is capable of. It can be designed in watt hour or kilowatt hour. Battery capacity, C rates, the different C rate. So C20 means that 100 Ah can be discharged. Pairs can be ampere can be discharged for 20 hours a day. Then gravimetric and volumetric energy density, it helps comparing that what is the size of the batteries, what is the footprint of the batteries, that can be defined from volumetric. And gravimetric energy density can help us compare the weights of different types of batteries from certain amount of usable energy, and it is measured in watt hour per kg. The other characteristics or the specifications are the depth of discharge and the state of charge. The depth of discharge is the amount of energy battery's total capacity which has been consumed, and both the depth of discharge and the state of charge is given in percentage. And the maximum and the daily depth of discharge is usually set for lead acid. It is recommended for 70%, and for lithium ion it is recommended for 80%. That is because this depth of discharge is directly dependent on the number of cycles, which you can see on the right side of the slide. And this is easily available by the manufacturer sheets. You can see that if we reduce the depth of discharge, we increase the number of we also decrease the number of cycles that that battery can give. If we only discharge up to 90%, you can see that we can get maximum number of cycles and thereby increasing the life of the batteries. The other important parameters that are looked into while designing or while comparing different technologies is the round trip efficiency, response time, because the various applications would depend that for how much time it is required, and whether it is an energy application or a power application, lifetime and cycle lives that a particular chemistry can give. So the various applications that we discussed while designing, there are certain applications that gives us some we can quantify it, and that gives some monetary benefit to us. And there are certain applications which are not, we are not able to monetize it, and that doesn't give us any monetary benefit, but it adds value to the grid. It gives us the qualitative benefit of putting up energy storage. And a few of these applications are peak shaving, renewable curtailment, or frequency support. These are the things that we can get some monetary benefit out of it. Whereas in case of upgrade deferral or load leveling or reactive power support, black start, this only gives value and improves the quality and the reliability of the grid, but doesn't give us a monetary benefit. So what is value stacking, and why do we need all these applications? So as the prices are still on the higher side for the energy storage, but so it is important that we use a single system for multiple use cases, because it is capable of giving us multiple applications. And this usage of single system for multiple use cases is called value stacking. And this a particular energy storage is defined by its C rate, and the C rate is nothing but the charge and the discharge rates of a battery. So for example, if you hear about 1C battery, so 1C battery is a 1 hour discharge, and similarly 0.5C or C by 2 is a 2-hour discharge. So mostly you will see that for energy applications where peak shaving or the overloading of a line or an asset, say a transformer, happens for more than 1 hour uh, or for say 2 hours in a day, so that comes under energy applications, because C rate is less than 1C. And for power applications, which are like ancillary services, where we need a very fast discharge and charging because of an unexpected failure or system restoration, or if there is a ramping support required, or there is a sudden drop in the renewable output, then these are the C rates which are greater than 1C, and that's under the power applications. So based on the applications, this the chemistry is done and the cells are designed. So the C rate and the multiple use cases are very important, because if we are designing, say, for peak shaving, so when peak shaving is not being used, then we can use it for energy time shifting, where we charge during the peak hours and we discharge during the off peak hours, when the prices are really high, or the system marginal cost is high. So we can use it for multiple use cases and design it for multiple use cases. So few case study and the BRPL pilot I will share. So battery energy storage, as we discussed, it consists of a battery rack, battery modules, and then there is a power conversion system, a bidirectional inverter that converts DC to AC and AC to DC. And over this power conversion system, there is an EMS, energy management system, that helps us automate the commands and use it for multiple applications, which sits over it, and we are able to control it remotely and manage smartly or optimize the charge and the discharge. This energy storage can be in a 20 feet or a 40 feet container, or it can be in a building type, that depends. Container time is a standard solution, and there are customized solutions also. So in case of BRPL, we have recently deployed 6 number of battery energy storage systems at the LV side of distribution transformer, 11 kV by 415. And we have used lithium iron phosphate based energy storage, which is a chemistry that is thermally stable as compared to NMC and other chemistries. And in terms of installation, we have designed and we have used separate enclosures, battery bank, PCS, and an ACDB, which includes the energy management system. And the main applications that we have sized the system and designed the system is for peak shaving and energy arbitrage. So for sizing the battery energy storage, we identified the overloaded distribution transformers, and which were also the space constraint, where we were not able to upgrade or augment it to the next higher capacity. Then we estimated the overloaded continuous instances and the peak loadings beyond a predefined threshold, say 70% or 80%. And then we size the kilowatt and the kilowatt hour required for each of the sites. So this explains that we first took the loading of a distribution transformer, then we applied the CAGR of 2% for 5 years, and then we calculated the overloaded instances that are happening in a day, the continuous overloaded instances, and then we came up with the maximum kilowatt that was reaching in those continuous instances, and the time duration, whether it was for 1 hour or 2 hours, and that helps us coming reaching to these sizes. So there were 6 sites, 6 distribution transformers, and on each sites the power rating and the kilowatt hour requirement varied because of the load profile and the load duration curve of these transformers. So the cumulative capacity that we have deployed is 477 kilowatt and a 674 kilowatt hour, with a C rate of 0.5 C at all the sites. This is a snapshot of the our EMS, energy management system. The green line that you see is the transformer loading, and this blue line that you see is the charge and the discharge. The negative shows that the power has been used to charge the batteries, and the positive shows that we have discharged the batteries. So when we have charged the batteries, you can see that the loading has gone little up, and when we have charged the discharged the batteries, the grid power has come down, or we have. So since it is the winter time, We have deployed it. We are using it for energy time shifting application, and in summers we will be using it for peak shaving because these are the two main applications we have designed for. Yeah, thank you.
Any question? Participants may raise their hands one by one.
Hello, ma'am. Hello,
Hello.
ma'am. My request is to the organizer, please remove the background noise of the person talking. And please, my request is to host and organizer, please remove the background noises of the persons talking during the whole session. Session of Miss Sugandhita was very good, and it gives a new insight regarding the battery management system, and also it gives the a technology of peak load curtailment and peak shaving. Uh, so my question is that how these batteries are connected to the grid. It is via some inverter circuit or some power electronics or some fact controller. How these batteries are connected to the grid?
Yes. So
How AC is produced from these batteries?
yes. So like I showed in the schematic diagram. 1 second, sir. So we have a 1 second, sir. I'll just. So we have a bidirectional inverter that converts DC to AC and AC to DC, and via that inverter that is connected to the AC breaker of the secondary side of the distribution transformer. So it is just like a solar inverter, and it acts in the grid connected mode. So it takes reference from the grid, and then it will operate. If the grid is not available, then at that time it will not discharge the batteries. The system will shut down. So it is connected to the secondary side of the distribution transformer.
Okay.
So over
No,
here
ma'am.
we use.
Okay, ma'am, my question was how this is connected to grid. Means if batteries and grid both are at the same voltage level, then power cannot be transmitted from the battery to grid. So is battery is at more voltage level than the grid? How the
No,
power is
sir. So this
transmitted
is
at the
a.
same voltage?
Yes, so this is a grid connected inverter that is there. So the grid connected, just like grid connected solar inverter, it takes reference, it's synchronized with the grid's voltage and the frequency, and then it starts charging or discharging. And it is working parallelly with the grid. So it only gives the it is only operated when it crosses the threshold. So it is not a replacement of the entire transformer. It is only working parallelly and providing the surplus or the extra that is required to limit the transformer loading to a threshold value. Am I clear, sir?
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. Now our next presenter is Shri Alok Kumar Mishra. He is an electrical engineer and has more than 12 years of experience and knowledge in energy industry. Now working in the DNV as a business lead power grid APAC, he is responsible for the DNV power grid business in the APAC. Before DNV, he worked with Power Research and Development Consultant and Limited and Suzlon Energy Limited. He is an expert in power system study, asset management, and power failure investigation. His skill set includes onshore wind, offshore wind, solar storage, hydrogen, and other technologies. May I invite Shri Alok Mishra, Business Lead ASP Energy System DNV Energy India Limited, kindly start with his presentation. Over to you, Mishra sir, please.
Thank you, madam. Let me share my screen first. My screen is visible to all.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alok Mishra from DNV, and I'm going to present my presentation on impact of asset management in the distribution system. My presentation is going to be a small introduction about the NVGL. Then I will discuss about what is asset management and what is its impact on the Indian Discom, how the NVDL used to do the approach and for the asset management, and what is our experience. And after I conclude with the so the NVGL is almost a 157 years old company. And we have the different brand name in the market. Earlier might be someone knowing the schema. So DNB is a 150-year old company. We have 12,000 plus employee. We have the 1 lakh plus customer across the world, and we have running around 100 plus country across the. We are running in the 100 plus countries, and we used to spend our 5% total revenue in the R&D. So this is our a overview, where we have established the first hydrogen full access testing lab in the world. We have our 170 plus in industry standard across the power sector. So we are our service are in the maritime energy system, digital solution, and other business assurance services. Here our major services in the power system. We are in the wind. We done the analysis of 65 gigawatt across the globe. In the solar, we done more than a 6,000 plus projects worldwide. In the TSO, we are the one who developed the first testing lab for the 1200 kV. In the storage, we have done the more than 5 million household energy storage battery testing. In the EV, we have the two major lab where we are do the all the EV related testing and charging related testing we used to do. This is the data analysis where do the different type of analysis related to. These are our offshore wind vertical, onshore solar. This is for storage. This is our power grid. Now let's come on the topic asset management. When we talk about the power site, power system, basically that our transmission and distribution system of pressure and are the basically a component of the asset, and there are the different aspects of that. And when we talk about that, uh, the energy like new energy transition, electrification, new regulation. These are our different aspects, and we have to one side we have to manage our cash flow. One side we have to be manage our financial strength, and also we have to be maintain our regulation. So we as a energy utility company, any have faced that three major dilemma. And as a asset manager, we have the one of the major challenge that what is the condition of my old asset? How and when use limited resource and budget? What asset data to be need to gather? How we do sufficient manpower in now in the future? What part of system are the risk? Where do you need to be focused and which thousand of asset? How minimize unplanned downtime? What do we face replacement where so when? How do we make sense constant decision and how we can asset data support our decision making. So when we do the asset requirement, what extension and why? So these are the always as a asset manager, as a this some company, we have to be see all the aspects on the asset. So when we do about the asset management, as standards say, a systematic and coordinated activity and practice through which and optimize optimally and sustainable manager its asset and asset system. They assess performance, risk, and expenditure over the three life cycle on the purpose of achieving in the organization strategic plan. So when we talk about the if we talk about the historically, the in term of asset management being used by the financial service company that manage the investment fund activity and passive asset management in the financial sector to also concern with the return capital acquisition merger and asset management. But after that, lots of innovation happened in the electrical system, and the wake up call come from in the 1980, followed by the downtime in the and in 2002, the SIGRE Joint Task Force 23.18 defined the asset management of the T&D business, operating at the electrical market in the involving the key decision making and network business to minimize long-term profit while diverging high service level to customer and acceptable the manageable risk. So we asset management which starts from the in 2002 in the different aspect where they talk about the uh, start discussion from the SIGRE and in journey toward the asset management standardization start when the British Standard Institute a published available specification that is in the short we used to call in the past. In 2004, they prepared the UK-based Institute of Asset Management, and further it is redesigned by the in the 2004. So yeah, so these are the two major asset management guidelines where internationally we used to follow. One is the PASS. PASS is the came from the US and the full form is the PASS is public available specification. It's a completely British standard and ISO is we know very generally. So it was started with the uh, in 2004 when PASS published, and it was the main focus was the requirement specific, and second one the implementation guideline. Then in after lots of discussion, ISO published in 2014 where ISO talk about the overview principle and key of the asset management, and it come up with the many other series like ISO 55001 where we talk about the management system requirement. When again it comes to the ISO 55002 where we talk about the management system guideline for application of ISO 55001, and also in 2000. Uh, 14 there was another past version came in the future which was the more about the definition scope structure of asset management system. So when we talk about the principle of asset management, my screen is visual. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when we talk about the principle of asset management, it covers the four aspects. The function of the management system for asset management is to establish the asset management policy and the asset management objective. It is also helpful in detecting, coordinating, and controlling asset management activity. It is helpful to improve risk control and provide assurance to the asset management objective. Like when we talk about the asset portfolio, asset portfolio is that are the within the scope of the asset management system. When we talk about the asset management system, it is a set of integral and interesting element to the established asset management policy, asset management objective, and process to achieve the asset management. And it is covered by the asset management where coordinate activity and the organize to realize the value of the asset. And it completely cover under the minimization of organization of asset management. So when we talk about the function of asset management, these are the major element of the asset management. So uh, uh, the informative purpose we have described in the core principle that modern asset management is based on the government as a government by the ISO 55000 standard. These are also formulated the following publication like asset management. The ISO 55000 series describe the requirements of a mature asset management organization. It don't show the addressing the main element that are the critical to any asset management organization. Yeah. So this is the when I am going to talk about the asset management site. So asset management system processes have several characteristics. The first is the clear understanding about the assets, such as physical and non-physical assets, tangible and intangible assets, and there should be clear alignment called a line of sight between the overall objective and plan activity that may place every day related to those assets. The line of sight between the organization strategy direction and made to day-to-day activity. Managing asset vertical characteristics of asset management system to align the top down and aspiration of align with the bottom up, realize the opportunity of the asset. The asset management ownership and accountability reside with the uh, top management level. However, the administrative team adopt the culture of discipline that focus to delivering the objective of asset management. This involves asset management related decision principle when making capital development decision and work ensure that the organized view asset management to the system level as the important as safety, environmental quality, and other consideration. So benefit of adoption of asset management, why we should have a asset management philosophy and from philosophy to proceed. These are here we are going to talk about the benefit. So asset management helps organize to create value for their asset by striking the balance between the often conflict interests such as financial performance, environment, and social representative, service quality, and acceptable risk level while fully aligned with the organization strategy and the goal. When we talk about the optimization value of asset, taking it into the accounting of reach, opportunity, and performance, it should also uh, uh, these opportunities are too effective effective, efficient, adequate control and government of the asset management risk and opportunity. So when we talk about the improvement operation safety, it's related to day-to-day operation, maintenance, activity, and construction work can be adopted by the influence of the proper asset management system. When we talk about the improve financial performance and inform investment decision, and organization decision making can be improved by the cleaner and more transparent use of information about the asset. Improved decision making can positively influence return and investment and reduce costs, while a same time in preserving asset value with and without sacrificing the short and long-term realization of objective. When we talk about the demonstrated social responsibility and compliance, it adjustment to the asset management standard. Um, Many as assume that the organizer definitely is compliant to regulatory, statutory, and legal requirements to supervision, but in the transparent manner. Further, we talk about the improved organization sustainability. The balance between the short and long-term objective and expenditure and performance contribute to the sustainability of the organization and its objective. Yeah. So when we talk about the value driven on data enable, the NVGL advanced asset manager offers service to bridge the information gap between the technical analysis on asset and optimize decision on maintenance and replacement strategy. Like when we talk about the decision making, so decision making it come from data came from the uh, grid asset, and the similar way this we can take a top to bottom and bottom to top approach, where when we talk about the value driven, it is come from the decision making, then integrated digitalization of the data and grid asset. But when talk about the data enable, the data it come from the grid, where we talk about the that data from the asset come to the make the integrated system, and that impact on the decision making system. And here a dedicated method to assess the condition of the medium and high voltage requirement based on the priority tool and measure and comply the internal standard and best practices. So advanced asset life cycle is a top to down and down to top approach, where we talk about the basic and advanced diagnosis. Also talk about the condition assessment. Loss like here I'm taking an example of the power transformer, where we talk about the wild laboratory service, remaining life assessment, health and risk index tool, replacement strategy, lifetime extension, decommissioning advice, and failure. And the other side, we take the transformer specification, design review, manufacturing, quotation, high voltage testing, fight and site weakness, maintenance management, and monitoring service. So when we talk about the life cycle, it is come under need to demand a specific design, select and procedure, installation and commissioning, operation and maintenance, refurbishment, replace and dispose. So these are the basic introduction of asset management. Now I'm going to quote what is the impact on the India system. When we talk about the Indian Discom, as per Electricity Act 2003, Section 5.1, they mentioned that a distribution license may with prior information to the appropriate commission engage in any other business for optimized utilization of its assets. Means Indian grid in Indian Electricity Act talking about the maximum use of the asset, and it is so it is itself is a very mean one line many with many that what is the definition of optimization? It is so a portion that when we talk about the optimization utilization, there is a many components should be come under it, and for maximum optimized utilization of the asset, it should be a position where we can use the maximum use out of that. So that a portion of the revenue driven for such business shall it may be the specification of concern asset commission be utilized for talent for billing the distribution shall be mentioned separately account for the each business understanding to ensure the distribution business neither subsided in any way such business understanding not incumulator of the asset suppose such business nothing content in this session shall apply to the local. So when we talk about the Indian DISCOM system, there are m- maximum issues with the Indian DISCOM. Like we know very well how Indian DISCOM are performing and how much and how they are regulated by the utility. So so Indian Credit Code stated that the most like when we talk about the recent things, but especially on the RE side, they are as per IGC stated that most of the wind and solar energy sources are presently connected and in future are likely to be connected on the SU. State utilities, the state out of the renewable relevance of the SIGRE browser where 723 cycle talk asset management of distribution network with the high penetration of the distribution generator. So these are the uh, a uh, coming from the where well function a government of India expressed a commitment to provide 24 into 7 uninterrupted quality, reliable, and affordable power supply to each everyone. The Ministry of Power formatted reform based on the resulted clean distribution system, helping supporting of the many system. They bring many scheme to support the DISCOM to undertake the reform and improve performance of the time-bound manner. However, still there is a many issues going on with the DISCOM, and one of the major technical issue we can say that if we manage our assets properly, they should bring the value to them. So when we talk about the DNV experience, the NVDL have carried the asset management gap analysis and roadmap designing, asset management implementation support, asset management improvement, asset management process, and other related to the yeah. How DNB approach? So when we do the asset management strategy for the any discom, we use the in-depth technical expertise and also bring the ISO 30,000 and risk management. When we talk about the ISO 55, in addition of that, uh, we bring the ISO 55,000 coverage, where we talk about the stakeholder and organizer concept, organizer plan and objective. We define the SSG AM plan, asset management objective, asset management plan, implementation of asset management plan, and other aspects of that. So then, so when we including the using of the ISO 55,000 and then with technical standard, we do the analysis in the two phase. First is the assessment phase, and second is the implementation phase. In the assessment phase, we do the preparation, gap analysis, roadmap, and in the implementation phase, we are doing two things. First is the implementation support, and second is the ongoing support. In the gap analysis, we do the analysis of all the documents which available with the DISCOM, and we do the create the create the planning out of that, and we see the review all the document and see the commitment, how commitment by from the client. In the phase 2, we do the assessment using the ISO 55,000 and 1,000, where we do the awareness workshop with the DISCOM. We do the consultancy with the selected person, and the assessment with the DNB. We do the go for the this session. After that, we do the a roadmap of the implementation solution, where we do talk about the priority action need to be closed in the gap, specification DNVGL roles, and draft align with the roadmap. In the phase 4, we are carrying out the assessment assistant line in the implementation solution, where we provide workshop particular in the requirement, assistant action in the roadmap, and delivery. And after that, once organization got the ISO 55,000 certificate, we helped in the PDCI, where plan, do, check, or we continuous we are following. So when we talk about the framework, we see the majorly where the distribution company are, like what is the asset life cycle management, how they are doing that, what are the risk management and mitigation plan they have, what asset how they're collecting the asset data, and what is the quality of that, how they're doing the O&M on the daily and regular basis, how they condition, what is the condition and performance of their assets, what is their knowledge about the infrastructure, and how they monitor and evaluate their system. So when we talk about the conditional assessment of the network asset, we carry out in the three phases, where first we do the analysis of the data. Second, we do the online diagnosis. It is required we do like online diagnosis mean on-site visual testing and other aspect. Third one is the asset risk and condition assessment. So so where in the first phase we do the all the data analysis at the desktop, where we from the utility or from the DISCOM and do all the analysis. Then in the approach on-site measurements we use to carry out. Third one is the asset condition and risk management. Based on the result of the assets are described in the detail of report per substation or per, we do the measure equipment, and based on that color coding, we do the deep the code performance of the each, and we can it also can we integrate with the DNB assets health management and risk management methodology. And also we sometimes we view the software like Cassette and Foresight asset management. Also, we have the some smart data analysis tool where we talk about the uh, where we talk about the descriptive analysis, the idoneity analysis, predictive analysis, predictive and intelligence. So these are the globally key reference. And so I would like to close the asset management is somewhere is a regulatory requirement. It needs to be well functional electricity infrastructure. Presently challenge, especially in the distribution. So why asset management is required? To first of all, it is a the overview that the asset management plan plays a crucial role when boosting the professionalism, maturity, and performance of the distribution system worldwide. The asset management approach is characterized by the company-wide system that enable integrated risk-based decision making, aiming to provide maximum value of the stakeholder. Apart from the generic benefits of the asset management, which have been described in the report, yeah, some document, the asset management concept is especially relevant for the transmission and distribution because the high investment volume of the electrical asset called the strong emphasis on the smart investment decision to realize value of the investment. This investment value in further boosted of the growth share in the replacement in investment due to aging transmission and distribution asset, and also making update to distribution generator device. Third one is a significant change in the control and communication equipment in the system. The asset management business model had rapidly gained popularity through the 90s, and many utilities respond to the liberalization of electricity market and association, deregulation, and deregulation. The asset owner, asset manager, and service provider model had offered to opportunity to improve efficiency by making business decisions dependent on the actual technical status and need to be assessed and the mode risk mode. When consider the specific situation of the Indian distribution company, the consideration are the strong, like which I mentioned in the slide, and it reform the project asset management. So this is from the my side. Sorry, due to lack of time, I moved very fast. Sorry for that. So you have any question? If you want to have any one, you due to shortage, you can mail me. You can call me in my. You can email me on my email ID. Yeah, you can call me on my mobile number for any further clarification doubt. Yeah, anything.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Now, our next presenter is Mr. S. Narayana Kumar. He is currently an energy professional with the demonstrated history of working across various dimensions, city utilities, electricity regulatory commissions, policymakers, and development organization. With over 10 years of experience, he has been helping various distribution utilities transition of next gen utilities. He has extensively involved in the development and implementation of demand side management action plans and energy transition roadmaps for various electric utilities government agencies across India. He has also assisted power utilities and regulatory commissions in developing models of electricity pricing, network planning, and augmentation exercises to improve operational performance and to accommodate renewable energy. May I invite Shri S. Narayana Kumar, Associate Director TERI, to kindly start with his presentation. Over to you, Kumar sir, please.
Thank you, Madhu ma'am. Thank you for your kind introduction. Um, I would like to share my screen first of all. Um, and my screen is visible right now.
Yes, sir.
Can you please confirm it? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Uh, Thank you so much. First of all, we would like to, as Terry, we would like to thank CBIP for giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts and the learnings, what we have obtained over the last 1 decade, working with more than 30 utilities in this country on the various aspects of energy efficiency, demand side management, and distributed energy resources. To starting with the presentations, I would like to highlight the growing relevance of the demand side management in India. Earlier in this day, as well as on these sessions, many of our esteemed speakers have already emphasized the need for demand side management as a virtual clean energy capacity. Because as our late Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam has once mentioned that energy efficiency is the most economical, feasible, and convenient way to generate energy by actually saving in it. In India, like most developing nations, there is a scope for the fifth source of energy. As he has mentioned exactly, India is one of the largest, the fast growing developing economies in which the reliable and affordable power is going to play a very important role. In that aspect, demand side management can provide a win-win situations for all the key stakeholders that has been attached to this ecosystem, like utilities, consumers, governments, because if it will overall improve the quality and reliability, and it will help to minimize the cost of supply. Because as we have made a large number of commitments in the last COP26, we have made that 50% the renewable energy utilization by the 2030, as well as we are planning to be net zero by 2070. The distributed energy resources planning as well as its enhancements plays a very important role on that. So in this presentation, we try to focus on what are the major steps that has been taken by the Indian utilities, what are our experience in developing demand side management action plan, because in case of policy drivers, India is, I can say, very proactive in that. Starting from 2001, we have come up with the Energy Conservation Act. After that, the creation of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Then we introduced the Standard and Labeling Program. In 2008, we have come up with the NMEEE, which is a National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency. After that, we have formulated the formation of our Super ESCO, which is known as Energy Efficiency Service Limited, which plays a very key role in bringing large amount of energy efficiency into various sectors, like our Ujala program, Pavan's program, introduction of electric vehicles, as well as the smart metering. So they have come up with a large number of programs. So, but in all these things, what we have observed after working with more than 30 plus utilities in the country, we feel that a DSM intervention will become more and more successful when it become an utility centric DSM. So in that context also our regulatory commissions are very proactive. Out of almost every state have come up with their DSM regulation in which it will mandate every distribution utility to make DSM as an integral part of their day-to-day operation, undertake planning, designing, and implementation of the appropriate DSM programs on a sustainable basis. So to begin with the DSM, when you are formulating a DSM action plan, the load research becomes a starting point for it. Because as I mentioned on the right hand side, you can see the different steps that has been involved in the development of a DSM action plan, starting from doing the load research. Load research is basically nothing but, as you all know, that it's basically understanding how the system load curves or how the utility is behaving, or what is the behavior of the consumers of different consumer category that has been operating under their licensee area. So based on that system level or feeder level analysis, as well as to collaborate with the survey inputs that we got it from the demand side load research, we try to analyze what would be the consumption pattern of different consumer category, what are the interventions that can be possible brought down their demand, what are the possibilities for shifting their demand. So based on that, we used to formulate a DSM action plan, which will, after the DSM action plans, we need to make a regulatory approvals. We have to get the DSM action plan regulatory approvals. Based on that, we used to create the DSM program documents also, in which we try to emphasize on the institutional, implementable, as well as the financial models for introducing these DSM interventions. So based on that regulatory approval, we try to implement on that, and we try to monitor and evaluate what would be the impact that has been brought down by this. So you can see that the TERI's engagement with the different utilities in demand side management, energy efficiency. We try to do almost end-to-end solution for the utilities. On the left-hand side, you can see it was a little bit outdated also, because we have covered most. I can say I am proud to say that we are able to cover almost every part, each and every grid region of this country. And what we have observed was, when we are doing the demand side management way back in 2010, 11, when I'm joining Cherry as a researcher, and I started learning these basics of demand side management, the load research from Mr. K. Ramanathan. He used to tell me that we used to capitalize the methodology as per our Indian conditions. We can't demand that every utility should have a smart meter, every feeder should have a smart meter, which will have to capture each and every aspect of the data. So the data itself is a challenge in India, because lack of demand data in a granular form itself is a challenge. But we need to think about the ways that could help to overcome this challenge, because we cannot wait to introduce DSM after introducing the smart meters, because smart meter itself, nowadays itself, India's smart meter penetration is very much limited. So we need to find out, we need to customize, and we need to develop the methodology for carrying out these load research to understand the behavior of the utilities as well as the consumers by the data that has been already available with them. So the most common challenges that we have observed when we are working down with the different utilities from different grid regions, that the lack of demand data in a granular rate, of course, that's a big challenge. The study of consumer behavior trends, because the consumer behavior trends used to change across the utility. That I will, on the later slides, I will explain about how the domestic consumer trends have been changing, how the agriculture consumption trends have been changing. So it has keeps on changing. So the other important aspect would be, we have to convince the utility also on their cost benefit analysis, because when we are bringing out that DSM regulations to every utility, they always have a fear that it was actually, we are reducing their sales, which means that we are actually reducing their business. So we have to convince them that what is the long-term benefits of them, and what would be the short-term benefits that can occur to an utility by introducing the DSM regulations. Then, of course, the death of ESCO, to some extent, when the ESL has been come down in 2014-15, it has been get reduced to some extent. Then, of course, the relative priority of the utilities, because demand side management has been always be treated. Because when we used to do, when myself, Ramanathan sir, was used to do engage with these utilities on the different capacity building program of which have been organized under the leadership of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we have seen that the utility officials used to mention us that the DSM is not their relative priority, because of course there is always many other number of priority areas for the utilities. Then next would be the lack of consumer engagement. Why the consumer engagement is limited? Because we need to communicate with the consumer. Because as the utility always keeps demand side management as a less priority thing, there would be there should be a push that has to be required to get connected with the consumer on these various aspects. Then the design of the time differential tariff, DR availability, the financial support, the cybersecurity issues. So all these issues are very much common when we are introducing these demand side management interventions. So as our experience say, first of all, as I begins with the load research, we used to say that it's always ideal to capture the data from the smart meter, from every smart meter of this country, and to build a database and to do an demand side management analysis, or I can say the system level or feeder level or consumer level analysis based on that. But unfortunately, many utilities in India find it very difficult to get the capture the data on a very detailed format. In most of the utilities, we have seen that a large number of log sheets have been managed, in which there is a huge amount of human intervention is involved. When there is a human intervention is involved, of course, there should be some errors which should be happening. So what we used to do would be we try to select the feeders based on their predominancy level also, because in India, in many utilities, there are mixed feeders are available, which means that 50% of your load is from the domestic and 50% is from commercial. Because then those feeders never show a characteristics of a domestic or never show a characteristics of a commercial consumer. So there is a need to, we have to define the predominancy level. So THIERI itself has developed a methodology in which around 75% of the load for a particular consumer category shows the predominance level. So based on that, we try to capture the predominance level of these consumers. And after that, we try to do a demand side load research. Why demand side load research is important? Because we need to understand the market sentiments of energy efficiency. Because whether this, when we want to, for example, we want to introduce an energy efficiency water heater in northeastern grid region. Whether, first of all, I want to check that whether the energy efficient water heater is available there. If that is not available within the market, how can I promote that thing? So it's very important to understand that what are the market sentiments. For example, when we are doing an air conditioner energy efficiency program in Chennai, we come to know that each and every person in Chennai is using air conditioners. But the most important aspect was there is a huge secondary market that has been working in Chennai on the energy, on the air conditioner. So that we need to focus on an air conditioner replacement program, as well as the people have very limited usage of air conditioners. So there is a huge chance of an boomerang effect or a rebound effect when they say when the energy efficiency can be brought down. So all these things can be captured through a demand side load research. So we used to do a system side load research as well as a demand side load research before we arrive at a DSM action plan for any utility. So when you're focusing on, because in this slide we have been focusing on the different consumer categories. On the left hand side, you can see the load curves of different consumer of the domestic category from the different parts of the country. For example, I have put 4 grid regions like from Delhi, from Arunachal Pradesh, from Karnataka and Gujarat. You can see the domestic curve itself keeps on changing. Because in the case of Arunachal Pradesh, you can see that at 4:35 o'clock, the early morning peak has been coming. And another important aspect that we have seen in the case of Arunachal Pradesh was there was a huge amount of usage of rice cookers over there. And the rice cookers are actually contributing to their morning peak. It's not their water heaters, it's not their some other load that has been contributing to the morning peak load, just like happening in the southern grid. In the southern grid, in the morning, it was the lighting load and the water heating load has been contributing to the peak. But in the case of Arunachal Pradesh, it was the rice cookers in which they used to utilize for that. So it's basically a cultural food habit related things in which it will play a very important role. For example, in the case of rice cookers, star labeling is not introduced. And the most important aspect that we have seen in the case of Arunachal Pradesh or any northeastern state was these rice cookers are, majority of the rice cookers are actually second grade rice cookers that used to capture from the Chinese market. So they have been utilizing a or an, I can say, under star rated or an inefficient water heating mechanisms for them by utilizing a very cheap electricity that has been available for the domestic consumer. So there are various aspects that used to influence the consumer, like a social economic conditions, then the appliance density and the ownership, because the appliance density in Delhi would be completely different from an appliance density in Cochin or in Gujarat, somewhere in Gujarat. So appliance density keeps on changing. The penetration of many energy guzzling units, for example, like in the case of air conditioner, we have seen that almost close to one air conditioner per household we have seen in the many parts, many utilities in Delhi. But you can't see that kind of penetrations in somewhat in Gujarat or in Madhya Pradesh or in Jharkhand. So that is the kind of variation in the appliance density that we have seen. Then in the case of climatic conditions, you can see that from the load curve itself, there are some regions in India where the winter peak and summer peak differential is very high. For example, like Delhi, we have almost having 50% variation is there. But when you to the western grid, the variation was again reducing to the 20% or 30%. In the case of southern grid, it's hardly 10%. So the climatic conditions also plays a very important role. Of course, the low domestic tariff also plays a very important role. So when we are looking for the industrial and commercial categories, because many of my previous speakers have already mentioned about the aspects of time of day tariff introduction, the demand response introduction, how the peak time pricing can influence the industry and commercial consumers. So all these aspects are very good and can be introduced and has been successfully introduced in the many parts of the country. But I just want in this slide to highlight that there are different factors that used to influence these things also. For example, like in the case of Punjab, they have introduced the peak load extension charges way back in 2014-15. But that implementation of that introduction of TOD doesn't work very well over there. Why it doesn't work very well over there? Because at the night time, they are able to provide certain less tariff compared to their daytime or compared to their peak timing. But the problem that they have faced was during the night time, the majority of workforce is coming from the women side. So they are not available for the work. So that's not working well. For example, like when you're looking in the textile clusters of when we are working in Gujarat on Ahmedabad and Surat, which are the textile hubs of the country, in which what we can see that the peak there is a difference between the peak and the off-peak timing that has been already offered by the commission. But the problem is that when you are looking into the domestic, looking into the processing industries like the dyeing industries, the textile industries, in the textile industry, the major person who used to contribute, which used to call us that master in dyeing industries, he is always available till 7 o'clock only. So if it is a peak timing also, they are forced to work on that. So there are different socio-economic issues that used to influence this time of day tariff. So we can blindly implement these time of day tariff in many part of the countries. Then second major would be there are some technological process also which won't allow that much of shifting of the load. For example, like when we are comparing a chemical cluster, like an Ankleshwar cluster in Gujarat, we would have a huge amount of potential for the variation in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries because agitators loads or sprayer dyers loads that has been attached to these chemical industries are very much shiftable. But for example, let's consider some furnace industries or a forging industry in Shimoga, in Karnataka, in which a huge amount of foundry load is involved. For example, when you're considering a foundry unit, almost 80 to 90% of their total load has been consumed by induction furnace. So when there is a demand response event comes and you cannot reduce the temperature of a foundry very quickly, that is a problem with that because if that happens, it will affect the quality of the end product. So it is these industries are not fit for doing the demand response. Similarly, like the diamond cutting industries in Surat, they are also less prone to these kind of vaccine making industries. So these kind of industries are not prone to do that demand response events. Why? Because that process itself was not at all allowing them to do because the potential of the DR is highly dependent on a process flow and what type of technology they have been using. Maybe in the textile, maybe in chemical, maybe in food processing industries, that can be possible. But there are some industries, such as subsectors in which the demand response is very much restricted also. So the utility have to identify those subsectors, industrial subsectors that are capable to carry out this demand response process also. When you are coming to the agriculture cluster, agriculture, I can say that agriculture demand side management has been emphasized, I can say, for the last 1 decade in many events or many instances also, because on the left hand side you can see the chart in which contains a large number of red points and I can say green points. Red shows the overexploited zones in the country, and green shows the region that has been already converted to saline. So you can see that the major agro-dominant states like Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, you can see there is a huge groundwater issue that has been happening over there. Why? Because the agriculture, electricity itself is a free. That's another important aspect. And the second most aspect would be the lack of investments in the distribution sector for augmentation and the power quality that will hamper the star rated pumps also. For example, like you can't simply just blame a farmer that you are not using an 5-star rated energy efficient agriculture pump set if you are not providing a good amount of power supply to them, because we are not providing a quality power supply to them, it would be very difficult to them to run on an energy efficient efficient. So they are actually forced to work with the local dealers to procure the local made pump set which can adapt or which can work on reduced voltage levels. So that is also an important aspect that has been faced by these utilities. High upfront cost of energy efficient agriculture pumps at high maintenance replacement cost. The awareness is very much limited among the farmers. They are highly influenced by the the peer comparisons or the peer farmers or the local dealers that has been working over there, the lack of governance and innovation to support this technological advancement. There is always a trust issue with the distribution utilities, because this I have seen that when we are implementing the India's first DBT scheme in Punjab, Terry got an opportunity to work along with the World Bank and the state of Punjab to implement India's first DBT program, which is known as Pani Bachao Paise Kamao, in which what is the basic objective was that you have to save the water, and based on that saving, you will get the whatever be the amount that you have been saving directly to the bank account. But as the water can't be measured, we want to put the meters on the farmers to get, so that to evaluate the farmers that how much amount of savings they have been made. So, but in those aspects also, there are a number of trust issues also. The farmers always have a trust issue that right now I'm getting free supply, whether if I put a meter over there, whether I should get an later I get a bill. So there are a lot of trust issues problem that has been happening over there. So the utilities have to give emphasis on resolving these trust issues, because we try to do a huge amount of communication plan or communication strategy to make the farmer believe on that you are saving the water for your future generation, not at the right moment. So it's very much important to bring the farmers into confidence about the different aspects that we want to try to bring that. Second most thing was to bring the technological aspects, as well as to provide them very much reliable as well as a quality power to the agriculture feeders. Third major aspects would be on the government interventions on, like the MSPs, or on the farmers have to utilize the diversification of the crops on that, because we have seen a many number of examples in which there is a virtual water trade has been happening. For example, like I would like to reiterate one of the case studies that Perry has experienced when we are working in developing the energy efficiency roadmap for Jodhpur utility. The major highlight of a Jodhpur utility was their highly agro-dominant utility, which means that 40% of their total consumption goes to agriculture. In that block, in that utility, we have selected one of the block which have been highly emphasized on the groundwater level. We have seen that block name is Ocean Block, in which they're actually still being an dry, arid, desert climate region. They are still producing cash-rich crops, or the crops that has been assuring the minimum supporting price, which means that because of the I can say the different departments have been working on silos. So there is a convergence between these different departments which have been providing the support price, who have been training the farmers for the soil treatment, who have been helping the farmers with the diversity of the crop selection. So there is a coherence between these departments have to work to resolve this problem of food, water, energy nexus in the country. So basically, when you are looking in the intervention, there are a number of intervention. I don't want to reiterate that intervention, like energy efficiency, appliances, TOD, cluster level energy audit, DR programs, direct benefit transfer, training in the program, as well as the how we can influence the consumers with the behavioral energy efficiency program. Just like in Japan also, when we are working along with the Pepco utilities, we have seen that there are a number of behavioral energy efficiency programs that has been run by the state governments or the utilities to understand to influence the consumer by providing the differential pricing on that. Hitiyakushi Smart Community Project itself is a typical example of that. Apart from that, I would like to highlight another important program that has been run by this Japanese government. I come to know very, very, very interesting program like No Tie campaign or a Cool Bees program, in which the bureaucrats or the smart young professionals that has been working on these corporates are discouraged from utilizing a tie or an overcoat in a hot summer condition, which will help to reduce their chiller loads. Those kinds of campaigns can be still emphasized in a country like India, which have been lying very close to the equator. Because I personally seen there are many meetings in which the bureaucrats or the high professionals used to come up with a suit wearing on a hot summer. So why can't we influence those consumers? So it is basically we need to educate them. So that is what we used to do. We, as Terry, we used to feel that when you want to implement an demand side management intervention or we want to influence the consumer, it's basically the three I's. It's basically we have to inform them, we have to intervene them, as well as we need to incentivize them. Incentivization can be done on various aspects. Different business models can be adopted for that. As I mentioned in my earlier said, there are a number of challenges. For example, like lack of data. In the data, the advanced meter infrastructure, the smart meter that we are thinking about. So the smart meters are not to be installed only for loss reduction. It is the source of data for various aspects, like when we are introducing demand side management, DRMNs, that smart meter is going to play an important level. So we need to convince the utilities. We need to communicate with the consumer that you are not implementing a smart meter not only for loss reduction. There are a number of multifaceted benefits along with that. Then major would be the capturing the consumer behavior trends, behavior science segments can be done in India. That's why I just different color coding have been done like on the preference or what we have experienced on that, like easy, medium, and difficult. Cost benefit analysis. Of course, we can have a stringent M&V protocol also. We have already many of the states have bring on the DSM regulations in which what would be the cost impact assessment of that. Then death of ESCOs, there is a need to introduce the local engagement of ESCOs, and because the local ESCOs, not only the ESL, the local ESCOs can be also tapped on for the development of these things. But in those aspects, the utility-centric demand-side management program is very much important because the consumer believes the utility more than anyone. So that is an important to strengthen the DSM cell and SDA enforcement of regulatory compliance, the focused consumer awareness program, like I mentioned about this coal beach program that can be also done, the periodic load research studies, which I put it in a difficult state because I personally feel that when a utility completed a load research study, they used to keep this report on the shelf and they will forget that study for the last next 10 years. Because we have seen in Gujarat, what we have observed was when we are doing the demand side load research, or I can say the load research study for all the utilities in Gujarat in 2014-15, they have introduced the TOD timings in way back in 2000. For some utility, there are two utilities in Gujarat which are highly industry dominant. In those utilities, we have seen that the peak timing, that in 2000 they have introduced the peak timing as 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock being that peak timing. Now the peak have shifted from 6 p.m. to 2 p.m. in those industry dominant utilities. So you have to do the load research on a periodic manner so that you can understand that how the consumer's behavior is changing and what are the strategies that need to be get introduced on that. So periodic load research is an important aspect. Implementation of integrated resource planning is also important aspect. The value DSM as a flexibility source, because as we are thinking of moving of a next generation utility, or we can thinking about a DS introduction, that is a very much important for the virtual power plants as well as on that distributed energy resource, in which demand side management is going to play a very key role on that. Partial risk guarantee funds can be introduced, energy efficiency insurance, addressing cybersecurity issues, as well as the adoption of the blockchain technologies that can be introduced to overcome these cybersecurity issues. So, in short, DSM as a clean energy source hold forth a great promise to meet the vision of 24/7 affordable, reliable, clean energy to all. Understanding the opportunities and challenges and sharing the experience assumes importance in this concept. With that, thank you so much for your kind attention. I have placed one YouTube video link for that, in which we try to emphasize on the what would be the role of demand side management in the low carbon pathways of the discoms. I would like to invite each and everyone to please look into that video link also. That's all. I would like to wind up my presentation on that. Thank you so much for your patient listening. If you have some queries, please feel free to ask, or if you want to ask directly, you can please write to us also. Thank you so much for your time. Over to
If
you.
any participants, if any questions, participants. Okay, thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Now our next presenter is Miss Sangeeta Pandey. She is AMTech from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. In structural engineering, completed dissertation of dynamic analysis of railway steel, arch bridge, and a graduate of Muzaffar Institute of Technology. She has completed MBA Finance from IGNOU. She joined PowerGrid in the year of 2006 and presently working in the capacity of Chief Manager Civil in PowerGrid Corporation of India Limited. The recorded presentation of Sangeeta Pandey, PowerGrid Limited, to kindly start.
Good evening, everyone. Today, let's discuss about intelligent infrastructure towards a disaster-resilient future. First of all, I would like to say what is intelligent infrastructure. Intelligent infrastructure is smart infrastructure is the application of technology to deliver a more effective and efficient infrastructure service. It uses a layer of technologies which can be embedded in the design of new infrastructure or applied to existing infrastructure. For example, if we'll say that some local authorities have placed sensors in their water distribution pipes to enable speedy identification of leakage. The smart infrastructure not only going to identify the leakages, but it also controls volume of water as per demand and uniform distribution of water. Intelligent infrastructure is the result of combination of physical infrastructures with digital infrastructure, and it provides improved information to enable better decision making faster and cheaper as compared to traditional infrastructure. Here it is very clear that physical infrastructures include transport, energy, water, telecommunication waste, whereas digital infrastructures includes sensors, Internet of Things, networks, building information modeling, geographical information systems, big data, machine learning. Together they form intelligent infrastructure. Intelligent infrastructure is not just about adding technological blinks or arbitrary functions. It is about using technology to improve outcomes, well-being, and quality of life. Intelligent infrastructures talk to people and invite people to them. The word intelligent refers to the capacity of material to automatically sense or detect changes in their environment and respond to those variations through an actuation mechanism. The external factors include stresses, energies, and geometrics, whereas the internal factors include fractures, breakdowns, defects, etc. Basic functions which it performs is monitoring, predicting, self-healing, optimizing, learning, and protecting. It monitors the changing conditions and alter configurations according to what processes and applications are being asked to do. It predicts, that learns from the user's patterns and then predict needed capacity. Automated workload management detects problems and takes steps to solve them. It optimizes and analyzes infrastructure services using different providers to optimize cost and performance. Here, in this schematic picture, we can see that cantilever beam, which can be considered as infrastructure assets, is having sensors and actuators, processors, amplifier, and power generators. Here, we can see the steps like that infrastructure asset is having data is collected and it is sent to sensors, from where data is transmitted to data processing. After that, controller transmits command to actuators and which adjusted the performance of infrastructure assets. This can be categorized into three parts: instrumentations, interconnections, and analysis. Instrumentations enables infrastructure managers to gather large quantities of highly accurate performance data very quickly. The pervasiveness and low cost of existing devices and sensors offers the ability to measure the exact conditions of every aspect of operations and quality of service and operations of an infrastructure. Interconnections includes the advanced communications technologies that offers the potentials for government, infrastructures, businesses, and citizens to link data, system, services, and infrastructures ensures speedy communications of data between infrastructure systems, managers, and users. The analysis part includes the growth in analytic capabilities that provides the key defining characteristics of intelligent infrastructures. The collections of integrations of data, while necessary, are not sufficient to constitute intelligent infrastructures, technology, or system. It is only when analytics are applied to this integrated data and that insight can be derived to inform decisions and actions that can optimize systems. And why intelligent infrastructure is needed? Intelligent infrastructures allow owners and operators to get more out of what they already have. That is increasing capacity, efficiency, reliability, and resilience. If we go in detail, then we can see that for smart grid, intelligent infrastructures potentialities are the power system equipments, power system monitoring, software for grid management, for energy metering, data management, analytical services, surveys, and meter installations and maintenance. For energy management system, it includes wireless building monitoring and control system, street light monitoring and control systems, and online software applications that allows for the identification and targeting of energy inefficiencies. Energy efficient equipment includes smart heating, ventilating, and air conditioning equipments. Water metering includes data management and analytical services, water quality monitoring, treatment and distribution systems, intelligent transport system, waste management, system integration services, software systems. These are the things which are the part of intelligent structures. Without that, it cannot be defined. Getting more from the existing assets will enable owners and operators to enhance service provision despite constrained finance and growing resource scarcity. And in mature economies, apart from this, we can also have the factors like financial constraints, environmental considerations, population pressures, international domestic policies, customer expectations and preferences, technological changes. For this intelligent infrastructure required right now. There are functions like the most mature economies, the value of infrastructure in use is greater than the values of development. The rapid and ongoing reduction in the unit cost of collecting, communicating, processing, and storing information is leading to a state of digital abundance. The volume of data, information, knowledge is mushrooming. For these, the solution in intelligent infrastructure is the best one because it not only accumulates data, it filters the data and preserves only those data which are required for the future or for the present uses. From based on data, it can process, it can make changes in its process system, and it can heal its process system. Apart from this, intelligent infrastructures are increasingly seen as solutions to the long-standing problems that face local government attempting to respond both long-term and short-term threats to resilience. Strained resources spread across ever-growing overpopulations, aging infrastructures and public services systems, competitiveness in the global economy, acute human and environmental stresses due to rapid growth and change in regional areas. The climate changes in the particular regions, the upside down turning of environmental and climates are also making us going to give us the challenges. The aging infrastructures and public services which lack the caudal compliance as per the current situations, the strained resources spread across ever growing urban populations. These finally these things are the factors which give a final call that now it is the high time to have these all the existing structures to have some sense of intelligence so that maximum benefits can be extracted or people can have quality life. The benefits and potentials also can be think that they improved asset utilizations and management across transmission and distribution systems, threat detections, dispatch public service officers, timely management and evacuations as needed at the time of disasters. For smart grid, especially for the distribution system, if we look to the transmission line towers, the maximum losses which it suffers are due to cyclones or due to theft. So if we are going to put sensors or actuators in that, then it is confirmed or it is very well at some places also it has been placed, but it is because ours is redundancy is very much high, so it can be calculated in that way that if sensors are there, then it can definitely going to have the earlier predictions of the damages or disasters on impact on that particular structures or recordings, or in advanced situations where the smart materials with memory or healing properties will be there, then it can also heal the damages. If the intelligent infrastructures strategies and technologies are to seen, then asset management, advanced metering infrastructures are going to get impact over asset management, SCADA, GIS, distribution automations, outage management, IVR, workforce management, engineering analysis, CIS, load management, demand response, and conservation voltage reductions. A little bit of explanations required that it control points for devices, feedback for end users, automated curtailments, planning, circuit views, transformer sizing, billing informations, reductions of bill complaints, near real-time data, lowered energy bill, secure operations, last mile insights, plant accounting are some of the facts which it is with. Intelligent infrastructures are having some designing principles based on which it can be designed. The first one is that it is the part of intelligent society. Decision makers must be in the position to receive and interpret the information and convert it to use by the infrastructures. The users may need information digital in the form of digital or analytics. So the society must be intelligent enough to respond, to feed and to read the data which are going to get reflected in the intelligent infrastructure. It is one part of a network of infrastructure. The single asset may deliver little value on its own. A bridge, for example, may allow a vehicle to pass from one side of the river to another, but if there are other rivers along the vehicle's journey, then every bridge on the route needs to perform well for the drivers to achieve their purpose. Intelligent infrastructure evaluates its performance as part of a network, not only of human-made assets but also of natural assets that work with it to achieve well-being. The third one is it monitors its own performance and learns. Intelligent infrastructures collect data about its own performances, learns how to perform better throughout its life, then either make changes itself or provide the imperative for users to change behaviors or decision makers to change decisions. After that, we can see that it sees and increases resilience to future shocks and stresses. Intelligent infrastructures gather information about future changes in technology, society, climate and resources and provides information that help us to prepare for or change the course of those changes. Importantly, to address the technology components, there is redundancies built in such that power or communications failures do not cause chaos. It controls and manages itself almost. The intelligence is about moving from having no information to being able to predict outcomes to having some control over situations. To move towards greater control, we need greater analytical capacities, better sensors, greater communications capacities, and better control. It controls and manages itself almost. It gives more than it takes. The benefits of designing intelligence outweighs the cost over the asset's life cycle. Above all, it improves overall well-being, giving more than it takes. Hence, based on these 6 principles, it works. Now, first, the slide is there that how intelligent infrastructure is resilient against disaster. What is disaster is the first question. That is, it implies a sudden, overwhelming or unforeseen event. Sustaining a facility in hazardous regions requires appropriate resilience against natural calamities. Calamities like a flood, storms, earthquake cause multi-billion cost damages to structures. Now, here embedded sensors allows for the predictions of disasters, real-time data, captures allow for live monitoring of the state of infrastructures in case of disasters, addresses new and emerging threats to public safety and security. Its data may make the people to evacuate as based on the data. Millions of lives can be saved. Evacuations can happen on time. Damages to the disasters can have early responses so that it can heal the impact of disasters at any situations. Because it is the local feedbacks or local ranges which can impact the data on which sensors will act. Advances wireless technologies helps to better transmit data. Now the slide is there that having the intelligent materials and infrastructures, what will be these things? The basics of smart materials will be immediacy, self-actuations, flexibilities, self-monitoring and self-healing. Smart materials adapt to environmental stimulus by adjusting their characteristics, features and functionalities in a context-dependent, reversible and repetitive manners via electrical, chemical and mechanical mechanisms which allows to respond to a broad range of configurations and applications. There are shape memory materials also, which are metallic alloys that can regain their original shape after being subjected to large deformations owing to phase transitions. Apart from this, piezoelectrics refers to the compound that display the distinct behavior of piezoelectricity. When piezoelectric material is exposed to stress or strain and vice versa, or mechanical deformations, an electric current is produced which results the sensors such as accelerometers, ultrasonic transducers to take advantage of the direct piezoelectric effects. Applications of smart materials for sustainable structure is very much required. These are the smart concrete, smart bricks, smart meters, zero energy buildings, intelligent energy. These days, green energy concept and green energy buildings are also in vogue. Here in the diagrams, you can see the smart concrete which stable, which make the temperature stable for human comfort. Smart bricks are also there, which are having sense. Why intelligent infrastructures and how it is in smart grid? As it is very unambiguous here, smart power distribution is having with cloud applications, power monitoring, energy management, medium and low voltage, grid connection, planning and consulting, financing, services like that. A smart grid consists of transmission system. If transmission line towers are having intelligent infrastructures, then even millions of amount can be saved. Even life of people can be saved with the disasters which is going to get harmed. The buildings will be having intelligent infrastructures. Then it can act as per the demand. It can have the zero energy concept. Energy management, power monitoring, financing, all systems can have the zero energy concept for this. Shape memories, polymers can use and act such as heat, radiations, electric fields, magnetospheres, acidity, certain ions or enzymes that can revert to their original morphology if at all damages can happen to them. Self-rehabilitation, self-damping and self-structure health monitoring can have the options for the smart grid, which definitely going to make it a strong and very much user-friendly to the public, to the people, to the users, to the decision makers. Now, if it at all we have to see the trends, then further, or if we are going to rely on the past, then repair, replace, rebuild, status quo, current opportunity optimized, system limited to yesterday's technologies, reduced returns, limited upside, exposures to the competitions. And if reliance on the future is there, then we must invest in new generations of technologies, new business opportunities, system expansions, competitive advantages. Artificial intelligence and cloud migrations are the options also available with intelligent infrastructures, which definitely have the automation architects unlocking greater levels of resiliencies and ability to self-monitor and self-heal. Cloud migrations is having resilience and customer experiences, and cost is advantage for this. While concluding, we can say a very punch in a very punch statement that all sectors need a safe, efficient and sustainable power supply system. Intelligent buildings and intelligent infrastructure facilities optimizes asset use and ensures that they can respond swiftly to new requirements for all benefits for the users and stakeholders. The functions like automation, smart decision making, enhanced customer experiences, medical advances, research and data analysis, solving complex problems, business continuities, managing repetitive tasks, minimizing errors are going to get solved with this intelligent infrastructure. So we can opt in our smart grid intelligent infrastructures to give better resiliencies against disasters, against any unhappening or mishappening which are not as per our situations or which are not in our control. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. Now, I think we can close now. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we have come to the closer of day 2 of this important online training program. We would like to convey our sincere thanks to all our eminent speakers for their gracious presence, efforts, and time for making valuable presentation with very rich content. Thank you very much. We also convey our sincere thanks to all the participants for their active participation and making the session lively. The online training program were participated by 100 about delegates from different utilities, PSUs, and manufacturing hubs. Hope all of you must have been benefited. We appreciate your joining this interesting online training program and we wish your participation in our future knowledge enhancement program also. Well, with this, we call it a day and see you next time. Till then, goodbye. Please take good care of yourself. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you again.